Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Contractor Evolution. This is your host, Benji. Look, there is a ton of talk around private equity entering the space these days. We all see the Instagram posts and read the articles about entrepreneurs who've struck it rich by selling their businesses to these mysterious private equity people. But today, we're going to learn what it's actually like to sell to private equity from someone who has done it. Over the course of 30 years, Steve Wheatcroft grew his humble landscaping business called ULS into a $30 million a year behemoth that, no surprise, caught the eye of private equity. And after the deal was done in late 2019, he even stayed on as CEO for another 3 years and helped the new ownership scale through more acquisitions all the way to 100 million. He is literally the perfect person to hear the unfiltered truth about what selling to private equity is all about. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And believe me, there is plenty of all three. So without further ado, let's dive in with Steve Wheatcroft.
You're watching Contractor Evolution, where we unpack the systems, tactics, and skills you need to take your fast-growing contracting business to the next level.
If you're here to learn what it takes to scale up, work less, and increase profitability, you've come to the right place.
Stay tuned to learn what separates the new breed of contractor from the old school, and welcome to your ultimate guide on the business of contracting.
Steve Wheatcroft, it's so good to see you. Welcome to Contractor Evolution, my friend.
Thank you, Benji. Happy to be on today.
For our listeners who don't know you, and most of them won't, can you give us a little bit of your story? Because today we're going to talk about what it's actually like to sell to private equity. And I think before we get to the questions I have on that, they need to know a little bit about your journey with ULS. So tell us about ULS from the 10-minute version from high school or mowing lawns to where you are today.
Yeah. Before we get going, though, just remember, I'm not the Steve Wheatcroft that's on the PGA golf tournament. Every time that guy gets on the leaderboard, my phone lights up text and look at it. And I've got about 500 pictures of Steve Wheatcroft on the PGA board. But that's not me. But it's good.
Different podcast. That's a different podcast.
Yeah. But anyway, my story. So that 10-minute version. So I'll make it quick. So was basically at University of Calgary there. And I was playing hockey on a hockey scholarship, and I was going through my Bachelor of Commerce program at the Haskayne School of Business. I found that really, university, my experience was that it was really grooming people for, these kind of corporate positions in companies, banks, oil and gas sector, because I was going to the UFC. They were, really pushing this kind of, regimented education. But in my third year, they had a real entrepreneur level MBA class they offered. So I immediately jumped on that because I was pretty excited about maybe one day having my own business. And in that, we had to write a project on a business. So, me and my partner at the time, who's went on to be a really successful developer in Calgary, we wrote a business plan on a company we called University Lawn Services. So that's where the ULS originally came from. And it was really about taking what we thought was kind of a, lack of better term, a dirty industry that was very fragmented, and cleaning it up and growing it. So we kind of wrote the business plan. We only got a B-. The prof said we were very we weren't original, is what he said. I said, well, I didn't know it was a creative writing class. I thought it was a class on how to make money. But again, reserve my comment, but those that can't teach, right? And those that do. So I didn't really take his criticism
too seriously.
We went on.
Yeah.
No. And then we launched ULS in 1989. It was myself, my partner that wrote the business plan, and two other guys that played at UFC. One was my brother by birth, and the other one I say is my brother I got from business, and we kind of launched ULS in 1989. And then, it just kind of started to grow. We had rapid growth. By 1993, there was only two of us left. So it was me and my brother's best friend. And we grew the business really quickly and, went through all of the different, stages that you would go through. And, Benji, you heard my talk in Florida about the kind of the development I went through as a leader. But, in 2012, I ended up buying out my partner. It was a tough time. The company had to pivot, and I took that. That would have been in 2012. And then by 2017, 2019, we were around a $31 million company. And at that point, we started to attract the attention of private equity. So you really saw it probably in about 2017, 2018, where private equity really looked at the whole services delivery sector, whether that be landscape contractors or electrical contractors or siding companies. They really saw an opportunity there because there's a lot of small businesses all across North America that were, let's say, 1 million to 5 million in revenue. And they said, look, this is a big chance to consolidate. So in 2019, I ended up selling the majority shares of ULS to private equity. And then I had another company at the time called Spectrum Equipment. And I kind of was spending a bit more time over there running that. We had heavy equipment and snow and ice management equipment sales business. I was gone for about 3 months from ULS, just helping them out with mergers. They came back and asked me to be the CEO. I came back to ULS. It would have been in 2020 and kind of navigated them through basically all of the acquisitions that they now have. And from 2019, when I was bought, till 2023, when I left, we took the company to right around 100 million in sales. And it really morphed in that we did have a strong amount of, what would be called, landscape construction, maintenance, snow and ice management companies. There was a lot of those in the portfolio, but it also owned a large towing company, the largest towing company in Alberta. And as well, we added on a modular company that did modular camps for the oil and gas industry, mostly in northern Alberta, but they've now expanded into Ontario.
Those are good businesses. My uncle's in the camp business.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So it was basically you guys were landscape maintenance and then snow and ice management. You grew, started this as a university project. 30 years later, grew it to 30 million. Sold out to private equity, and then for about another 4 years grew it from 30 to 100. I honestly can't think of a better case study of someone whose brain we can pick on what it's actually like to sell to private equity. I think actually we'll start here, Steve. I think a lot of people we use the term private equity a lot. It's getting talked about a lot. This guy sold, or this person is looking at selling, or and I actually think it's worth, it might seem simplistic, but I actually think it's worth defining what private equity is. So can you just give us in layman's terms, what is private equity or a private equity group? What are they trying to do? What are their incentives? In other words, how do they make money? Just give us the landscape a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question because I think that, a lot of people go through life and they hear all these terms like EBITDA and TOA and blah, 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 blah. It's almost like a different language. And, I think that people really don't understand what private equity is. And I don't even know if my version's completely right, but obviously being around private equity for a long time and, buying, rolling in more and more companies into our organization. And then also, since I've left, I've had a number of opportunities to meet and talk to different private equity guys across Canada, just because they're interested in the industry and what's going on, especially down in the US. But really how, in layman's and the simplest terms, how private equity works is this usually, and some of this stuff I'm going to say it tongue in cheek. So we'll, take it with a little bit of humor, but typically, a group of suits get together and they decide to take what I would say would be fairly robust financial education and strategic marketing and the building of what they would feel would be bigger organizations. So they come together and they look, the first thing they want to do is they want to raise funds. So they go out and they raise funds. And typically what they'll start up is an LC or an LLC, so a limited corporation. And that's one of the benefits for investors to invest in private equity, because they're buying a number of companies, but they're really only through the private equity, they're kind of buffered by that, incorporated buffer for anything from bankruptcy to getting named in lawsuits and stuff. So the private equity goes out, they raise money, and they start up a fund. And those funds are usually only open for a certain amount of time. So they would say, we're going to open the fund for a year. They collect money, and they typically try to get at least $100 to $200 million in a fund before they close it off. And then all of the people that buy in, and it could be anyone. It could be Joe that owns a gas station. It could be a family with some high net worth. And the reason why they invest with a private equity company is that typically the private equity company has a good reputation for bringing higher returns than they might be able to get in the market through securities. So they say, okay, we're going to put all our money with, and we'll just call them Southwest Private Equity, which I just made up, of course, but I like the name of it. So Southwest Private Equity goes out, raises the fund. Now the fund is used to go into business, and out of that fund, the private equity pays themselves fees. And the fees are usually quite high. So they're going to take a fee off the top. And then what they look to do is to take that fund and somehow create a return for the investors. And so they go out, and there's different ways they do that. But a lot of times they will look for opportunities in the market. And then most private equity and the kind of the game they play is they try to highly leverage the fund and banks. So they don't really want to use the fund's money if they don't have to, because they're putting their clients' capital at risk. So they take that fund and they'll use it for security against bank leveraging, and they'll go out and start to buy companies. And typically private equity leverage a lot. So in other words, where public companies might only be able to have, certain ratios of debt to equity, they might be able to push outside of that because they're in a non-regulated space.
5 to 1, 9 to 1, 10 to 1. Like, do you have sure that's probably a hard question to ask, but do you have a ballpark number, sort of how levered up they are?
Well, from the bank's perspective, the bank won't let them get too out of the range, but internally there's all kinds of games they play where they can get it leveraged up higher. And I've seen them, 10 to 1.
Right.
Now, it's a little bit scary, and there's, some good articles on there about how there's this transition now from, securities like public companies over to private equity, because they can bypass a lot of the regulations. So they can do a lot of things that typical companies in the public sector can't, because it's not regulated. So you're seeing a lot more of our economy run from private equity. So then once the private equity firm kind of come up, they usually, when they start a fund, they have an idea for it. So they might, in the case that I'm involved in, they wanted to buy landscape companies that had some, EBITDA, and they wanted to consolidate the market. And their theory is that they'll be able to, grow organically, but also create a bigger and bigger company. And in the end, bigger companies have higher EBITDAs, and the multiples for what people will pay for those companies start to grow. So really, depending on the size of the private equity firm, they're part of a food chain. So, smaller funds, let's say a $200 million private equity fund might be building products to sell to a $400 million private equity fund that's building products to sell to a $2.2 billion private equity fund. And then at the end, you'll see where they're building products for, pension funds, New York Teachers Pension Fund or the Toronto, Ontario Policeman's Fund. And this just keeps growing and growing. And that's kind of where you see this consolidation of companies and wealth start to occur, because, private equity is the first one that starts to kind of push them together.
Hey everyone, vision without execution is hallucination. So if you have grand plans for the future, but your team just doesn't seem to get it, honestly, the problem might be you. But the good news is we have built a strategic planning tool to help clarify your vision and rally your team around it. You can download it using the link in the description and start firing on all cylinders today. Well, this is an important point. And I like that we're speaking about this in very simplistic terms. I'm sure a private equity professional listening to this would be like, oh, they're totally wrong. And there's this option. There's another way to monetize it. But I want to keep it simple. And food chain is a nice way to think about it. They are buying, in this case, landscaping businesses. They're, as I say, rolling them up. They're kind of merging them together. They're making basically a larger entity or a collection of entities. But their ultimate end goal, it's not that they're necessarily super passionate about landscaping. Like, their business is essentially not unlike a real estate developer or a house flipper. Like they want to buy low and sell high, and they have a whole recipe to do that. And when they sell high, they're typically selling to someone higher up on the food chain. Again, I'm sure there's nooks and crannies and stuff that like there's details that we're not unpacking, but I really think it's important just to explain this very simply. That's ultimately what they're trying to do. I'm curious, what kind of expertise do they actually bring? And maybe you can, like, you know,
Sorry.
we're getting
it's hard
into,
when you say that not to laugh. But
I know we're getting into interesting territory. What kind of expertise do they bring on paper? What do they say they bring? And then what is your perspective in reality in terms of the expertise that they truly bring to this subject matter, to this vertical, to this industry?
Yeah. So, you know, and it doesn't really need to be industry specific. You know, what the value that they bring depends on the experience, knowledge, expertise, and emotional intelligence of what they're buying. So if they buy a company that's highly, you know, been around a long time, there are a lot of smart people, they understand the industry, like people who have been there a long time, I would say the value they bring becomes less. And really, it's just they're bringing capital. They're bringing the ability to scale up. And that's it. They'll tell you different, like, oh, we can plug into, we'll get better buying from our pension fund. Like, we can get better employee benefits and all this stuff. But I don't believe that for bigger companies. Now, the less experience and the, you know, newer companies. So let's say you were a $3 million operator and you'd been in the industry for 5 years and you're having some struggles because maybe you're trying to do marketing and you were trying to do all the finances and the accounting and you were just run off your feet and you decide to sell to private equity, you would find more value because you would be around NBA level people, a lot of very senior people that have been around banking and bigger companies and bigger strategic plans. So they might be able to add more value to a smaller company than a bigger company. But it's not very often, like if you're a major player in an industry, so if you're a $50 million electrical company, you know, running out of Edmonton, Alberta, they're not going to add a lot of value on how to be a great electrical company. But they're going to give you a value on, well, how can you get to be a $150 million electrical company? So you really got to decide, you know, what you want from them.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people just want their check and that's where it stops. But, you know, I don't think that for people that have a robust and highly evolved company, that they add a lot of value.
They're not going to come in and tell you how to do it better. This is an important. Now they will say they will, but I mean, artists exist everywhere. Is it the case that in your experience, in your perspective, and you know, in your network, is it the case that most people kind of agree the true business expertise that they bring is somewhat overblown?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay,
especially for companies that are built out and they have all of the. Like once you become, let's say, you know, when you look at, you know, there's that Vern Hardish book, you know, scaling up, one of my favorite business books. And they talk about $30 million companies. So when you become a $30 million company, you're a hyper-sized company. There's maybe only, you know, 11,000 companies in the US right now that do over 30 million. Everybody thinks there's all these big companies. Well, there isn't. There is quite a few real big ones. And there's some medium sized, but most of North America and even Canada, they're made up of small businesses.
That's right.
You know, a guy with 2 pickup trucks and, you know, he paints houses, or, you know, a guy that has 5 electrical vans and he does 10 million or whatever it is. 30 million is it. Once you get to even 20 million, you really have to know all the aspects of a business. And so, and you've tested these over and over again in your own industry. And how is someone that's never been in that industry is going to come in and say, you know, here's a better way to do it. When you get to 20 million,
you figured it out. You figured it a lot out. Yeah. Like there's not a whole lot. Like, I think this is an important point, not to interrupt you. Like you when you've gotten to that stage, you have figured out the formula. You have figured out the recipe. It's not to say you know everything, but you're getting to a point at that stage of diminishing returns in terms of the new lessons or the new processes or the new, like you kind of have the pieces assembled, and you'd be looking for sort of economies of scale. Maybe we can buy materials cheaper. Maybe there's a way to tap into a labor force where we can pay them a little bit less. Maybe there's a pricing strategy where we can charge our customers a little bit more. But operationally, sales-wise, marketing-wise, most of the recipe is kind of discovered at that point. Would that be a good way to say it?
Yeah. And I think that, everybody can keep learning throughout their life. But when you're, even $15-20 million company, and then you've been around for 20 years, let's say, you've taken a beating.
Right.
Like, yeah, you get up in the morning and your are stuck to you because the blood dried overnight.
Right.
Like, this isn't like your first rodeo. And then you get these guys coming in here that, and in all fairness to them, they're trying to learn. And I would love for a private equity firm, and I know lots of different private equity firms, and they're not all the same, but they all kind of hang out at the same end of the bench, let's say, but come in and humbly want to learn about the business, as opposed to saying, why don't you change this, or why are you doing this? And I think that they have to understand that it's because we've done the other 17 ways that didn't work.
Right.
Most people that own contracting companies and blue collar businesses, and I'm like that. That's how I grew up. I'm a blue collar guy. They learn through trial and error, and that's probably the best way you can learn. And it weeds out a lot of people.
Is it the case, Steve, that they rock up and because they've raised 100 mil or 200 mil, and because they have an MBA, or maybe they have more letters beside their name, and because they have a nice suit, and because they hang out in sort of upper echelon circles, is there an air, is there an attitude from them that, hey, Steve, I actually know more about your business than you do, or I know how to take this to the next level better than you do? Do you sense that from these groups a lot of the time?
Well, in all fairness, they don't all have that attitude
right
about them,
but they can.
Yeah, and I think that's more geographically based, but we don't need to get into that now. But I do, when somebody says, I have some ideas, or I think I could help you get to a bigger platform, I think that's true. They probably have the strategy and know-how to do that, because what happens is, if you're a $20 million contracting company and you want to go to 40 million, it's a whole different game. Even 20 to 30 is a quantum leap. And a lot of people don't realize that. And this is where a lot of people fail. They say, I'm 20 million and I know I can be 40 million. Well, that is so far out in front of them. They don't realize it until they get in too deep. And that is when a lot of contractors go bankrupt, because contracting companies, most of them, are one of the hardest businesses to run in the world, because you have high CapEx costs, especially in landscape and snow and ice management. Loaders used to get for 200 grand. Now loaders are 400,000 for one of them. And they got to put a plow on it and somebody in the seat. And some companies that I know have 100 or 150 of these, and they got dump trucks, and they've got we had 400 trucks roughly when I left. The capital cost is crazy. Then you got to staff it, and you're staffing in a market that's harder and harder to get people. And on top of it, not everybody wants to work outside anymore and get their hands dirty. So it's becoming harder and harder that way. So, and then on top of that, you have to take on huge amounts of debt and huge amount of risk, and all your stuff's out in the field. Like, my buddy, some of them, they build huge condo developments. And I think that's because, what, Steve, it's just one building right here between 14th Avenue and 14th Street, right here on this corner. I can look at it. Your shit's moving all around. Like, you don't even know where it is. They go, you got trucks in Fort McMurray and some in Edmonton, and a bunch sitting in Quebec somewhere on a highway. The liability, when I used to think about it, it would make me sick to my stomach. So I just stopped thinking about it. So to grow from that size to the next level, for some people, they just can't do it, because it becomes really about, how do you finance it? How do you monitor it? And how do you make sure you keep this huge entity on the tracks? And that's where, some private equity can bring in that knowledge for you. It can help you make that jump, And if that's your goal, then maybe they're a good partner for you.
I'm curious if you can say more about the jump from 20 to million to 30 million or 20 million to 40 million or whatever. Like and you mentioned sort of like CapEx, debt heavy, lot of equipment. It's all out there in the field. It's all exposed. Your exposure to risk is huge. I get all that, but is there anything else about the jump from that zone, let's say 20 to 30, that people misjudge or underestimate the complexity or the difficulty of it?
When you get to a certain size in contracting, you're the same as every other business out there. And you have to evolve from the guy that jumps out of the loader or the guy that jumps out of the plow truck or the guy that's running a D8 dozer. And you have to be able to put the blue suit on, and you have to be able to have higher level meetings. You have to understand that there's no time for you to get your hands dirty anymore. You get your hands dirty by managing and building a great team. That is a whole different skill set. And, I talked about those different stages of leadership. And when, you've got this, wear a helmet, take a bullet mentality, we're out in the field trying to do everything. When you make these quantum jumps, you need to change that mentality. Your leadership has to change. What holds back most companies is because the owner can't evolve far enough to make it bigger. So private equity comes in and says, hey, we got all these really smart people. We can help you. We can be your suits. We can be your financial guy. We can manage the debt and talk to banks. That's where they do add value because that's what they're good at, but they're not good at any of the other stuff of running the business. So that growth of companies really comes down to what the owner can do and how can he evolve. And if he can't, then it just stagnates. And I don't want to say that's a bad thing because some people would probably be a lot happier having a $10 million company than a $20 million company.
I think most would. I truly think most would. I wanted to, actually, no, hold on. We got to pause. I got to talk wardrobe. I'm getting too far down the rabbit hole. Okay, guys, wardrobe today is brought to you by Ox Glass, owned by Brady Williams. We just did an episode with Brady a few weeks ago. It's an amazing story. You should go listen to it. You'll find it on our feed. They operate in Lehi, Utah. They do windows, showers, and mirrors. They've been in Breakthrough Academy for 5 years. Over that time, they've grown from a $7 million business to a $27 million a year business, right in the range we're talking about, Steve. And I asked him, what's the single biggest thing that Breakthrough Academy has done for you? Brady says, teaching me how to have a business and not just a really demanding job. So there you have it. Thank you for the clothing. This is actually a really nice brand that they've done. I think we'll do some brand awards at the end of the year, and these guys are going to be in the top 5. Thank you for the clothing, Brady. If you are listening and you want to work with 600 plus other amazing contractors like Brady, you want to systemize your business for growth, that is all we do. You can learn more about us, Breakthrough Academy. That's who produces this show. And you can click if you're on YouTube, you can click the link below the screen. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can click the link in the description and check us out. Anyway, enough on that. I want to get back to this question of evolution. Steve, you talk about like the people underestimate their need to evolve and change as a leader. Was that hard for you? I mean, you said it yourself, like I'm a blue collar guy, and I'm not, and I've you've grown to a place where you're playing in quote unquote the big leagues. Was it difficult for you to make those jumps and change your leadership style? A
lot of people say, well, how are you successful? And I always say success is effort times time. So I worked really hard for a long period of time. I have a friend of mine that always would say, I'm a 35-year overnight success. Mm-hmm. So when you work at one thing for a long time and you don't deviate, typically people become very successful because you can't stay around in an industry for 35 years if you're not successful. It just weeds. You become extinct. Mm-hmm. But for me, I think that I was always about team building. So that came to me naturally. I think it was more because of my involvement in competitive sports. So, but when I got up to 30 million or even like around 16 million, I'd say like that 15, 16 million, what happened was I would go from 16 million to 20 million. And then the next year I'd go back down to 16 million. And then I'd go to 24 million. And then I'd go down to 14 million. And then I was caught there for a long time. And that was one of the hardest areas to break out of. And then when we kind of got up to that 22, 25, 28, 30 million. Really, the hardest part is to make it profitable. So, I always call the top line the brag number. So top line vanity, bottom line sanity, cash flow is king. So when you ask somebody about their business, they always say, well, tell me about your business. Oh yeah, we did 17 million last year. Well, what I started to say to people is, well, I don't really give a shit about the top line. Tell me about the bottom line. And then you'll see this kind of, like a cat trying to get off the hot stove because they know, okay, that doesn't sound that good. Whereas I would love someone to say, yeah, well, I only do like 4 million, but last year my bottom line was 1 million. And me and my wife live in Costa Rica for half the year, and we homeschool our kids there, and we got a surf camp.
Yeah.
Dude wins hands down. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, I think that this evolution of leadership's fine. And sometimes I question, do I really want to go there? But it's just the path I chose.
Yeah.
And in the end, it worked out because I built something that was valuable from somebody else's perspective.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about the deal making process, because I think a lot of our listeners are quite fascinated by this. And like, there'd be many people who are not like interested in selling to private equity, and nor should they be. And they've got a great lifestyle business that cash flows, and this is not even a thought on their mind. But even for people in that situation, I still think that there's really interesting insight and learning by diving into this whole subject matter. So when it comes to deal making with private equity, this again, another basic question, but I don't want to blow past it. What is EBITDA, and how does it factor into valuations?
So EBITDA is earning before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So typically, a lot of people, even outside of private equity, look at that as kind of like, how profitable is the company? Now, if you think about stuff like depreciation and amortization, those are broken down into different categories. Like, some stuff you're going to be amortizing down, and some stuff you're going to be depreciating. So it's usually like equipment's in one pool, and like property, plant, and like kind of the manufacturing equipment's in another pool. But needless to say, it's a good way to kind of look at a company and say, look, this is how profitable they are. So, that number is easy to come up with. You can get it off of your standard financial statement just by doing a couple pluses and minuses. And, it doesn't matter when you said like somebody might not want to sell their business and they got this great lifestyle business that's cash flowing. No, I never wanted to sell my business either until the day I wanted to sell my business.
Right.
And that day comes for everybody, because they'll get to a point and you get timed out, right? Like all trees drop their fruit eventually. So it doesn't matter how tough you are, how cool you think you are, how hip you are, how great of a business person, and how you can get up at 5 and work till midnight. One day you won't feel that way. And it's probably going to be because something major shifts in your life. That could be age, it could be illness, it could be other issues. You might have kids that are going to take a little bit extra effort because something's happened. You don't know that. So to have that mentality that you don't want to ever sell your business is foolish. What you should say is, I'm really happy with where I am. And I love where I am right now, and I don't want to change, but I also want to understand that down the road, things might change. So I'm going to run my business so that I'm trying to maximize my EBITDA, because I know in the end, if I have to sell it, somebody's going to come and pay me off of that number typically. And that's especially in contracting businesses. So it's a good number to look at and to manage. And it doesn't have, some years, you might have lower EBITDA than others. You don't need to lose sleep over it if it's kind of falling into your plan that you have for, your 3-year or 5-year strategic plan. So, but it is an important number to kind of use as a measuring stick.
It's an interesting comment you made there. It's a really interesting bit of wisdom or insight, where it's sort of naive to think I'm never going to want to sell my business. I love this. I'm going to do it forever, because you just don't know. And then the other side of it would be like a little bit more, capital minded, commercially minded, which is like, I'm going to build this business. I'm going to grow it. I'm going to maximize EBITDA. I'm going to sell it to private equity and get rich. It's sort of like, I feel like both of those perspectives are sort of like naive or misguided for different reasons. One is just sort of like you're being delusional about how much energy you have and how long you're truly going to want to do this. And the other one is sort of you're dramatically underestimating how hard it is to grow a business. And believe it or not, you actually do have to like, if not love, the thing you do. You actually do have to like the people and the customers and the process, or because you're there's no way that you're just going to like be so good at spreadsheets and strategy that this thing is going to grow and you're going to get rich as a result. So I feel like you just really nailed it, where it's like, what did you say? I really like what I'm doing right now, but I want this business to be sort of sale ready if I need to. And I'm going to design it that way, and I'm going to make decisions that way and hire people that way with that in mind. So with this EBITDA thing, like typically a valuation is done what they call a multiple, correct? Can you talk a little bit about how multiples work?
Yeah. So multiples would be, so a typical private equity formula that's used out there is EBITDA times a certain multiple, and we'll talk about that in a second, less debt.
Okay.
So when you got to remember the less debt part. Like I sold my company for a huge number, but I had to take off the debt, and then it was a reasonable number, let's call it. So, and multiples are driven by a number of things. So there's kind of what they would say is an industry multiple. So if a guy's going to buy up an electrical contractor, and you could probably even Google it. I Googled rental company, multiples the other day just to see what they were. And they were like, 2 to 3. Typically, when I was doing my deals and we were buying companies, multiples were around 4 to 5. In the US, they were higher, and now they've come down because interest rates affect multiples. And then some industries where you have, like, let's say IT, the formula might be different. Sometimes it's revenue times like a ridiculous multiple, because they look at, software for service companies are completely different than they do a contracting company. But things that really affect for contractors multiples is this, how much reoccurring revenue do you have? That's a big driver of multiples. So if you're in an industry that has to resell every year, so let's say you have a roofing company.
Yeah, good example.
Imagine you got some roofing companies, so they're going to say, well, you guys did 10 million last year. Why do we want to buy your company? Because we don't know if you'll do 10 million next year. Now, and we've talked about this, Benji, off camera, where I think, if it's a newer company, they don't have a long track record, then that's probably a concern for private equity. But as this company becomes more, long-term, invested in the industry, they're known, I would have to say that if they've done $10 million for 10 years in a row, they're probably going to do 10 million in the 11th year. And I don't like the argument anymore.
Right.
But like landscape maintenance companies have a higher multiple than landscape construction companies,
because they have, and I think the M&A term for it is what the suits call it. They call it predictability of future cash flows. You have contracts that dictate that they're, that I wouldn't say ensure, but greatly increase the predictability that there's going to be revenue coming in the door from customer X, from customer Y, from customer Z, because you have them signed on to contracts. You have them signed on to agreements that are we call it recurring revenue. And that's a huge factor. It's like a roofing business is a good example. A painting business is a good example. A home builder is a good example. Those businesses don't really have recurring revenue baked into their system. They have to go out and hunt and kill every single year to get the revenue in the door, to build the stuff or roof the stuff or paint the stuff they need to drive the profit. And they have to do that all the time. Whereas other businesses, landscape maintenance is a good example. I think, HVAC and electrical service businesses, plumbing service businesses are a good example in a different way. It's not that it's contracted, it's that they do service work, and there is real predictability that people's plumbing is going to break and they're going to call a plumber. So that's a huge factor. Are there other like big elements that drive valuations up or down?
Well, depending on how systematic you've built that business. So the more the company is based on you being there, the less it's worth to someone else. So again, The more your company's based on you showing up every day, the less it's worth. The more you can make a case for that they don't need you, the more that company's worth, and we'll probably get into it later, a better chance that you're going to get out alive.
Right.
So, that's another thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about, though, on these companies that don't have recurring revenue, let's say that roofing company.
Sure.
If they are established roofing company, what they need to do is they need to build the brand. So that brand, when somebody thinks like, let's say they're in Vancouver and they need a new roof on, they can't think, I got to get a hold of Scott Anderson, that guy with that roofing company. You got to think of, I got to get a hold of Shelter Lids. Those guys, I've heard they're the best company. That builds value, right? And people, the other thing that they don't understand, and this just happened. So this is what happened with companies I've been involved with, that reoccurring revenue. If you have a lot of reoccurring revenue, private equity would pay more for you. But now what's happened? Oh, inflation comes, and now you're locked into 5-year contracts, but trucks are 30% more, labor's 30% more, materials are 30% more. Oh, let's change the capital gains exemptions, blah, blah,
Right.
blah, 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 blah. Now, reoccurring revenue becomes detrimental, and resale, construction is reselling every year, can adjust next year for market pricing. I think they're more valuable. And these are some of the arguments that I talked about when I was a CEO, going, I don't know if these things are worth as much. Like, we're going through COVID, there's all these issues. And a lot of people just need to see, all you really have to understand is when you sit in the room with private equity is they're going to say this, but what's your educated argument to show them why your business isn't what they think it is?
What is the range that most contracting businesses fall into in terms of their multiples? What's the lowest you've ever seen, and what's the highest you've ever seen in this vertical that we're talking about? Your landscape maintenance, but we could extend it to anything else we might broadly consider a blue collar business.
Yeah, I'd say the highest multiples I've ever seen are in this kind of contracting space. It's maybe 8.
Okay.
8 or 9. But you got to remember, bigger companies get bigger multiples because more EBITDA is going to bring on bigger multiples. So, but the ones I've looked at, I've heard 8 or 9 is the highest I've heard. And the lowest I've heard is, oh, hang on, it's basically an asset sale.
Right. And then at that point, the deal's usually not happening because a lot of the times it's so low that the seller says, you know what, go pound sand, this isn't worth it.
Well, no, the seller, when those usually happen, the seller wants it to happen because now they're the person that said they never want to sell their business until it's too late. So they're sitting there, they need money. A case that I came across, a guy just had like illness and he needed to get out of the business. And so basically it was like, a company was there at the right time to buy him and said, I need like $650,000 for my fleet. And it was worth that. It was evaluated. So private equity just cut a check for that. Because for them, it was the quick and easy way. Because if they go to auction, they're going to have to pay auction house 12%. If it's a bad time for auction, like right now, Ritchie Brothers had an auction today and prices were way down. There's so much equipment laying around right now. It's crazy.
Well, that's a really important point, and that's an important wrinkle in this whole conversation is I think, we humans like to, I'm certainly like this. I like simple rules. I like simple kind of like guides and heuristics, and you go, okay, it's going to be, you build a business, it does really well, and it's probably going to be worth 3x your net profit or 3x your EBITDA. And that might be true, but you have to consider the fact that these multiples fluctuate a tremendous amount based on the macro environment. Where are interest rates at? Where is inflation at? Where is real estate at? Where is the job market at? What does the next 5 years look like? Like, there's so many things going on. And everyone's heard this saying, a business is worth, or anything, an asset is worth what someone will pay for it. It's easy to get excited about multiples. You hear this entrepreneur estate over who just sold his business for 10x and he's rich now, and look at the cool house and car he has. A year later, you could have the exact same business as him and you're getting offered 4x. Like it is not a perfect concoction or recipe, and it is a very fluid situation year to year, industry to industry, private equity group to private equity group. So I think, you know, we always hear about the winners, the guys that really like knocked it out of the park and timed it perfectly, but the reality is a little more sobering than that, I think.
Yeah. Well, they say, like, you know, if you think about it, like, what's the stats? You know, 80 or 90% of all startups go bankrupt. So if you're still in business today, you're 1 out of 10.
Right.
And then out of that 1 out of 10, I think it's like 1 in 100 people ever end up selling their business.
That's right. It's 1% or less ever sell for more than $1. Yes, that's true.
What people don't understand is almost impossible to start a business, run it for, you know, 10 to 20, 30 years and sell it. It just doesn't happen. You know, that people give it to their kids and then it doesn't turn out as good as dad had it, and it just kind of fizzles out, or they shut it down and sell off the assets, or, you know, basically give it away to the employees because they just don't want to be there anymore. Like, I know contractors were 79 years old and died in an excavator, and I'm not making that up. Like,
so
they
Steve,
just found him punched over.
If you're saying it's a bad strategy to have the attitude where I'm going to start a business and I'm going to scale it up and I'm going to sell it to private equity, it's a bad strategy just in terms of the math. Like, look at the statistics. What's if there's somebody listening to that or listening to this with that idea in their mind, and you're saying, hey, like, you know, very few people actually do, what's like a healthier or more holistic approach or attitude one should have towards like wealth building, or to say it less politely, like getting rich with their blue collar business?
Well, I think there's two things I have to address here. Number one is this: when you said, well, knowing that it's so hard to do this, you know, and if somebody's sitting out there thinking that right now, well, the guy that's thinking about it right now is starting at ground zero, completely different than the guy that said, hey, I got this great business, I run my truck through it, and why do I want to sell it? So he's already ahead.
Right.
He's like starting like 25 miles down the road ahead of this guy. And if he's thinking that way, then he's probably thought, well, you know, am I in the right industry? Am I building the right business that has demand? And it's completely different than somebody that just like me just decided, hey, I don't want to put a suit on and work downtown Calgary. I want to, you know, have a successful landscape company and get a tan. So I start building a landscape company. We're starting at two different ends of the spectrum. So the first guy's going to have more chance of doing that because he's going to go into something that maybe he doesn't really care that he likes doing that much, but he's playing for the end game. And the other guy's going, I like doing this, so I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. Now, for the people that are, you know, caught in the middle, let's say, I think the best attitude is, you know, you want to run your business in a profitable manner. And that's going to do a multitude of things. One is it's going to make sure that you have a good life and you have lots of opportunities and you can provide for your family and that you're financially stable. All those are good things. And it's also going to open you up to the fact that if opportunity comes knocking on the door, you're going to be able to turn over the financial statements and get paid for your hard work. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it's like, you know, my option would be like, and that's what I chose. I'd probably choose it again. I want to do something every day that I love. And that's why I chose my route. Now, somebody might say the exact thing. I just love finding that right business. And I'm going to go and have a diaper making company. And I know it's going to be but I'm pumped because I'm going to make a load of money. Right?
Right.
And if the guy's happy, the guy's happy. The worst thing you can do is look at somebody and go, why are you happy? Like, you shouldn't be happy. I'm not happy. I do the same thing.
Right.
Great. Happiness is a state of mind. And once you're there, good for you.
That's a good point. How are deals usually structured for the entrepreneur? Can you talk about sort of the cash up front quotient versus the earn out quotient and how these usually look?
Yeah. Now, you know, you go back to, let's say, GFL. And that was like a really big roll up in the waste management business. And I talked to a number of those guys and they were all like, you know, 90% cash up front, 10% earn out for 1 year. And you need to stay here for 12 months and then you need to leave and you don't have a job here anymore.
That's a good deal.
I thought it was in hindsight.
Yeah.
And then there's deals where, you know, a lot of them you'll see anywhere from 60 to 70 up front, and then there'd maybe be 2 years at, each year is another 10% in earnout. So you have to keep that EBITDA or beat it. And then in the very last thing would be, they'll want you to roll some shares into the bigger company, into the bigger entity. So you'll take stock in the new entity.
Right. Is there is that earnout thing based on performance, or is it usually just time? Hey, we want you to hang around for 2 years to make sure the transition goes smoothly, and then we'll give you your cash? Or do they anchor it? Let's say that remaining 30% based on certain performance, certain metrics that you guys agree to in the contract.
Yeah. So let's say when they buy your company, it was $2 million of EBITDA.
Yeah.
Earnouts are usually based on, after 1 year, it better be still $2 million of EBITDA. And after 24 months, it better still be $2 million of EBITDA. We're not paying you.
So it's conditional. Like it is, it's not just, you don't just get that. You don't just get that final check for being around. It's based on numbers they want to see happen.
Well, I mean, just paying somebody for being around is a bad deal for them, for the private. If I was private equity, I wouldn't do it, because you could just come to work and sit there, be on the internet all day, or clock off at 2:00 and go play tennis or whatever you want to do. There has to be some incentive for the former owner to stick around and make sure that the company is run in the same manner that when he sold it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and then they want you to roll up equity too, because that's a whole different conversation, but they like to have some fish hooks in you. So they want to have some reasons to have you want to hang around, and you're vested in the success because you own stock.
Got
right?
it.
Yeah.
Got it. Can you talk about how it changes when private equity takes ownership? I mean, this is something that you've had first experience with. Like what, for 20 years or 30 years, it's your baby, you're the head honcho, you're the guy, or you're the woman or whatever. And then this larger entity comes in and cuts you a check, and that's gratifying and rewarding and certainly nice financially. But there's also this thing, which is now it's like, this is now no longer your thing. I mean, it is sort of, but it's also sort of not. So can you talk about what it feels like as an entrepreneur, what changes someone should be ready for after that deal happens?
Well, let's back up a little bit. You said it's not really yours, but it's kind of yours, but actually it's not yours. So let's clarify that. It's not yours anymore.
Right.
So what happens, depending on how long you've been there, you have this emotional attachment. And, for a lot of people, including myself, the emotional attachment was to the people that were there and helped you build the company. So it's a weird feeling to be in, because you have all these people that helped you along the way, because there's not one person that's successful in this world, no matter what they do, that did it all by themselves. They had friends and family, and more importantly, a group of people that went to work with them every day and battled through all kinds of stuff, especially in companies that do like snow and ice management or excavation. Like, it's just a lot of hard work, a lot of late hours, and people just got to suck it up. So you get here and all of a sudden you're kind of there, but you're kind of not there. And what happens is, especially in my case, I felt like overnight, I was asked to go from an entrepreneur and take that entrepreneurial spirit and shove it into a box and throw it in the Bow River, and it's gone. That's not Steve anymore. You're not an entrepreneur. And now we want you to be a sentinel of the financial statements and become a corporified manager. And for me, and I'm only talking for myself, I didn't really like that set of pants. They were like, like I got big legs from hockey, and they the skinny jeans came into style and everybody starts rocking skinny jeans. I never really, Benji, I never really felt good in skinny jeans.
Right.
Right. It just felt a little tight in certain places. I didn't like to be pressured. So, so when I think about going through those years where I sold and I stuck around as the CEO and stuff, and this is no fault of the private equity firm. It's just, I needed to learn that. And maybe I could have found a quicker way to let go of it, but you can't. When you're around people for 32 years and you worked with them, it just pisses you off. Because a lot of times I would do stuff in my business and my wife would comment on it sometimes, like, you're crazy. Why are you doing this? because I just thought it was fun and cool. Like, the budget for the party is going to be 10 grand, but Steve wants to spend 40 grand. Or we've never had that technology before. We don't have any contracts for it, but I want to try it out and have the first one in Western Canada. So I bought it. No work for it, but we marketed it and stuff. And, maybe we didn't get the return off of it. Though under a private equity scenario, those decisions are looked on like you might as well have burnt down the castle. And there's evil and you're doing all these bad things. Whereas from an entrepreneur's perspective, it's like, that was cool. Like, man, it's my money. I can do whatever I want. And everybody appreciates it because they want to have a leader that does fun stuff.
So that stuff is over. Like that's what you're saying. It's very clear. That stuff is over. Like it's and that's something that I think a lot of people they take for granted. They don't realize how special that is as a business owner, where you can say, yeah, you know what? We could do a Christmas party here and people I'm sure would be happy, but I want to do it with helicopters and I want to do it with like whatever. It's like, that's the best part of like running a bit. I think for a lot of people, that's the best part of doing it. And that's now no longer an option. So that's a really big shift in energy and attitude and sort of the mindset you need to have about the business that, by the way, you built.
Yeah. And some of it, I mean, and it's just human nature. It's attached to your ego. Like, how fun is it when you have all these people work for you and we're all working together and they're like, this is cool. And you're kind of getting pats on the back and you're having fun and maybe you're paying a bit too much. People love that. Mm-hmm. That's who they want to work for. Mm-hmm. That's the companies they want to work for. They don't want to work for the company that goes, hey man, it's like 1:15. You're 15 minutes late for getting back for lunch. Like, no, you don't get a new truck. No. That just damages. And I always thought of it this way. Like, if you can build a great team and treat people great and always leave them feeling like they're getting fairly compensated, not only financially, but emotionally, and they get lots of opportunity, that's your job. That's what you should be doing. And then when you become corporified, it's everything comes at you on a 28-page P&L statement, and that's what everything's judged on. And as soon as you get in a position like that, and then you've been like that entrepreneurial guy that wants to do cool stuff and kind of wow people, it really feels, there's just such a dissatisfaction in going to work.
To put it simply, it's like the vibes change. Like the energy changes around the building, around the company. And is that because they are buying it with a vision of scaling it from, in your case, 30 to 100, and so therefore they need to be stricter, they need to be less patient, they need to be less forgiving? Like, are the reasons that the energy changes economical, or is it just like they have different values or a different culture, a different way of doing business? Or is it maybe it's some combination of the two?
Well, and I think that, when you have your tenure there as the CEO and it's your own company, like, you might set a certain standard. And then when private equity comes in, they need to shift the bar. They're buying you, but maybe you're plugging in with 8 other companies. So how do they have this homogeneous culture? They have one area or one city that's different benefit packages. They try to make everybody the same. And in doing that, typically there's inequity. So some people are going down and some people might be coming up. So you got to get these little outposts of discontent across, let's say, a company that's trying to become like across Canada, across the US. And that's really where, upper management needs to focus. Like, how do we try to keep this, dissidence in this one area down and kind of have this homogeneous feeling across the company? It's very difficult. Mm-hmm. And, I maybe underestimated how hard that would be, and how frustrating it is. And, like I said, I mean, I don't want to paint all private equity is bad. All I'm saying is this is the truth of what happens. It's not easy. And there's successful stories in it, but I haven't really come across very many yet.
Right.
Like the private equity ends up being successful. Like whatever they try to do works out. They make money. But I haven't heard a lot of people that worked at those companies are overly happy in the long run.
Well, that's why I wanted to have you on. I think I want to get a more sobering, realistic perspective on what this actually looks like. I mean, we have industry friends and partners, and we have certainly entrepreneurs in Breakthrough Academy who aspire to do this. We have a number that have already. I can't say who, but this is something that's going on in the blue collar business space, particularly in the States and particularly in a few industries. And I think it's going to happen more. And so I want to talk to someone who's actually done it and can say, I feel like cut through the bullshit is a little cliche, but give us a slightly different perspective. Like, just give us a realist perspective about what's involved, because everybody sees the numbers and they see the valuations and they see the pictures on Instagram after they sold, and it all looks really great. But I want someone to really shed some light on the reality of it. And so here's another good question. Let's say that there's an entrepreneur named Tim, and he's built a business like yours. Let's say it's $20 million a year in revenue. It's got 2.5 million in EBITDA. It's stable. It's got a 10+ year track record, a leadership team. It's got a strong brand. It's got all the things. It's got all the things that make it a desirable asset. Size, efficiency, the list goes on. What would you coach Tim to think about as he's weighing the options of, should I stay or should I go? Like, what would you say to him to really help him make the most informed and intelligent and mature and beneficial decision possible?
Yeah, I think what the first question you have to ask is, because Tim, I would imagine, has a personal guarantee. And on that personal guarantee, it says, oh, if Tim's business doesn't work out, Tim has to give his house to the bank. So the first thing I would say is, Tim, I really struggled with that. What is everybody going to think of me, or what's my company going to do? So what I did is I asked some of the most important people in my company to help me make the decision. And I asked them, I said, what do you guys want to do? If you don't want to sell, we're not selling. If you guys think it's a good thing and you want to go for it, because at the time we're thinking this could be really cool. We're going to try to build a national provider, do all this stuff. So we got in a room and we spent 9 hours and pounded it out. It was that typical, Post-its, plus and minuses all over the place. And we came up with a decision. And one of the things that these top people in my company said is they almost felt honored that I'd allowed them to step in the arena and help me make the decision. But at the end of maybe every hour, they'd always remind me, Steve, you've got 300 personal guarantees out there right now. I think I had a world record when I sold my company. And they go, we want you to be okay. And that was to me, was a big honor for them to say that, because it meant that I treated them good over 30 years, enough that they knew I didn't owe anybody anything. And so Tim really needs to make the proper decision for himself. And people in business, when I talk to a business guy, and I'm consulting or talking with them, I always say this to him somewhere in the conversation. I'm like, what does your wife think about all this? Because people don't realize, entrepreneurs might work 80 hours a week and there's somebody else paying the fiddler for that. And it's kids, it's your wife, there's all kinds of things. So how does this decision fit into Tim's whole life? And I just want him to forget about money, Tim. Let's forget about everything. Let's just take a full overview of where you are in your life right now. How old is he? How does he feel about things? Is everybody healthy? Do you still have the same gas for this? Is there something else you want to do in your life? And on those questions, then, I think what I would say to Tim is, okay, let's say he wanted to sell. Then I'd say, okay, let's start to, usually maybe a year out, and then you can start to learn how to say the right things and how to talk the talk. And when you get pushed up against the wall, a lot of guys just devalue their business by the stuff that comes out of their mouth.
Like what?
They'll just sit there and go, this is the one I always used to see. And I'd be like, oh, you just lost $2 million, buddy. well, yeah, of course my business is good. I've been around here for 20 years and I know everything about it. And like, I'm in here every day at 5 a.m. and I leave at 10 at night and I know how to
Don't
make
say
this
that.
thing run. And I'm like, oh, shut up, And then the guy's like, what did I say wrong? I said, you should tell me you never hear. Like you spend 3 months of the year in the Caribbean that you never hear that. I haven't even looked at my financials for 3 years. These guys, I just trust them. I'm just going off. I like to climb mountains and go fly fishing because the guy he just lost himself millions of dollars in 5 minutes because he doesn't understand that he's got to take the ego out of this.
Yeah.
The private equity doesn't give a about you.
Right.
They care about making money and they're going to try to get that business as the lowest price they can. And they're going to try to make sure that every benefit is in their favor. And they're going to try to make sure that they got you hooked into the success of it. And if you're not hooked into the success of it, they're going to try to get rid of you. So don't go in there thinking they're your buddies or everything. Go in there, make the best deal that you can. And when you get your check, say thank you, share a steak with them because these guys are just trying to make money too. And, they got a job. And then walk out and know you did the best job possible. Just, take a bit of time to slow down and educate yourself.
I got a closing question for you. This has been a really, really enlightening conversation. But I want to know what kind of advice you give to young entrepreneurs. You remember we were at that event in Orlando where we met?
Yeah.
And you remember Charlie, who is, I think is like, I don't know, he's like 17. Maybe he's 18 now. He had me on
he's 18 now.
He's 18.
It was his birthday.
He had me on his podcast the other day. The guy's a skit. I really, really like. I got time for Charlie.
Yeah.
So guys like Charlie, and I'm sure they come up to you at conferences all the time, and they've heard about the deal you did and your story. Maybe people locally in Calgary in your community. You're an older, more mature, very successful business owner with a story, and they want to know advice or what should I do, what should I not do. Can you maybe just give us some, 2 or 3 really sound pieces of advice that you usually give to young entrepreneurs when they ask you?
Well, a lot of times, like I met Charlie and I met Austin and all these young guys, and we were kind of holding court, and those guys bought me a lot of free beers. But anyway, the thing is that you can't rush it. You've got to take your time and you got to build from strength. And really, like I said, what builds success is time times effort, and that just works. It'll work itself out. And then you have to understand that all the failures are just lessons that you're going to learn along the way. And the other thing is to really, and this is so simple, but it's so, I see it so many times leading to bad businesses, is understand your value. Like, it doesn't matter if you're 18, if you're given the service that another company that's owned by a 40-year-old that's got, more professional trucks or whatever, but you're given better service, you need to charge for that. And I see so many contractors giving away work. Now, I'm probably going to say this, and then the guy that comes to do my furnace repair tomorrow is probably going to double my rate. But, like, I joke around about the rise of the blue collar worker, and, I know that's coming. There's going to be more white collar workers than blue collar workers, and there might already be. And then there's this aging infrastructure. So I always say to these young guys, like, be proud of what you do. You're a professional, and it's, there's no, let's say Charlie's 18 and then 4 years from now, he's 22 and he's doing $4 million. And some kid comes out of USC with a BCom in accounting or marketing. I'll take Charlie any day over that guy, any day to do any job on this planet, on the face of this planet. I'm taking Charlie because Charlie has learned real world education. And that's what I'm telling these guys is don't doubt what you're doing. Because these guys are going to be laughing. Their friends are going to be, if their friends going out, if you're going to be an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, you're probably going to have a good life. But if you're taking a lot of this other stuff at universities now, like, you're just cracking up a whole bunch of debt. You're not learning any skills that help. I think you're actually learning stuff that
Hurts you.
holds you back.
I agree.
Yeah, because it puts all kinds of weird in your head that shouldn't be there. But these young guys that are starting out early, like, I'm like, trust what you're doing and don't listen to other people. You know how many people, teased me? Like, they called me, remember, there's that Stephen King movie called The Lawnmower Man. My buddy's got a poster of that, and they put my face on it. They had t-shirts that said 1-800 cut your lawn. They dressed up, they put like synthetic turf on themselves at Halloween parties and said, well, we're going as Steve Wheatcroft, the lawnmower guy. I just got ribbed constantly. All my buddies are downtown working.
Yeah.
And they've all been successful, but no more successful than me. And, I had a great life and I have met so many people, had so much fun. So just stick with it and believe in yourself and know you're a valuable addition to society and what you're doing.
The rise of the blue collar worker. That will have to be another episode. Steve, I really, really appreciate this. It's been like, I've learned a ton. I mean, a lot of the times I'm trying to ask questions on behalf of the audience, but this one I was like, this is actually what I want to know about. And I feel like we just had a really phenomenal, detailed, realistic, funny walkthrough of what it's actually like to sell to a private equity group. And so I just want to say thanks for doing this with us.
Benji, every time I meet you, I have a great time and I appreciate your personality and it's always fun talking. So that was my pleasure.
I'll see you soon.
You bet, buddy.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Contractor Evolution. If you've already subscribed to our channel, consider sharing this episode with another contractor who you think needs to hear it.